All right, Erica, welcome to the podcast. We are recording. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm great. This is the first 9:30 a.m. Podcast that I've done. So congratulations, you are the first. But I feel
Thank you.
good. I feel good. I shot an ungodly amount of caffeine, but we are here, and this is
I
what we're
love it.
doing.
I know I'm an early to bed, early to rise kind of gal. So,
hmm Oh, well, I prefer. I'm naturally a night owl, but I do prefer to be a morning person. So it's really sometimes I can't tell if I'm honestly a morning person or not
yeah,
in that regard. Yeah.
sure.
So, uh, yeah, again, thanks for coming on. Go ahead and just introduce yourself to the audience about what you do, and just get into how you got into producing and whatnot.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm a producer. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, and sometimes I direct and sometimes I AD, but producing is really my main thing. And then also, I teach in the film and media production departments at UC, Ohio University, and newly Xavier, which I'm super excited about. So, I'm from Cincinnati and I'm from the west side of town. And I think growing up, I always knew I loved telling stories, and I didn't know in what capacity. I loved creative writing. I loved theater. I loved movies. I loved music as all means of telling stories. And I feel like as a child, I dabbled in all of that. And then in high school years, I really wanted to act. And then I realized I really wasn't a good actor. Maybe I should be on the other side of the
Yeah.
camera. And so that's what I did in college. And I went to the University of Cincinnati, where I studied English and I studied digital media. And from that point, I really thought that I wanted to be a screenwriter. Um, and so I went to get my MFA in screenwriting from Point Park University in Pittsburgh. And through that, I loved the program and I realized I was much too extroverted to be a screenwriter.
Mm.
And so I know how to be a good screenwriter and I can do it. That's not how I want to spend my career. So I started working and I realized there were a lot of people that needed producers and didn't even realize they needed producers.
This is true.
Um, and a lot of people don't like to produce. And so that made a lot of work for me that I enjoyed. So that's kind of how I got there.
Nice. I can definitely speak to where are the producers at, because it's normally the really creative people who are just always behind the scenes, like, oh, or like, as someone who does a lot of writing.
Hmm.
The idea of producing, to me, like, writing is my happy place.
Yeah.
If I'm not like doing anything on set or whatnot, but writing is my happy place. And for producing, it's just I've seen what goes into it, and it doesn't look fun to me. It's not appealing in the slightest. And
Sure.
the fact that there are people like you who just like producing is absolutely a miracle to have. Because
Well, thank you.
there's a too many. I don't want to say there's too many writers, but there are a lot of
A lot.
writers and directors and actors. Looking, you're on a lot of different boards. You're on the
Yeah.
board of
It's,
Ensemble Theater
yeah.
Cincinnati. You're a professor of. You mentioned Xavier, but I didn't see that attached to your email. Are you professors? Are you a professor at all these places, or are they different places that you've been to?
Currently at all of them, at all three. So at Xavier, UC, and Ohio University, but I teach online at OU because I'm not driving out to Athens.
I mean, that's perfectly understandable.
Yeah.
Athens is, for those who don't know, in Cincinnati, Athens is like what, 2 hours away, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. I feel like I should like show up at some point since I've been teaching online for a while and I should like actually be at the school that I teach at, but
You just surprise them.
I'll just show up one day. Yeah.
hmm So, what was the first project that you produced that you found? Oh, this is the thing that I want to do now.
Oh, that's a really good question. I feel like, right out of undergrad, right out of college, I fell into producing a film that I wrote, a short film. I wrote it in college, and then when I graduated, I produced it, called Hash Brown. And it was kind of a period piece, and it was kind of like beat poet esque, but it kind of explored LGBTQ culture and what that was like in the 1950s. And there wasn't a lot of it. So it was a lot of interesting research going into it and what that looked like. But that was kind of where I learned how to produce. So I made a lot of mistakes and, there was a lot of anxiety and sleepless nights and panic, out of the whole thing of, oh, all this stuff's going wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And what do I do? And this is my first rodeo. But I realized that I really loved it because I think I just have a brain that likes to organize things. And so even though I produced that, and honestly, I don't think I produced it very well, I was able to learn a lot from it and then go on and produce things better. So I think that was probably the project.
The other organization that you're a part of isn't strictly school related, and perhaps you can get into the differences between these two. Is the Ensemble Theater of Cincinnati as well as the Women in Film organization. How did you become to be a part of those, and why do you choose to be a part of them?
Yeah, absolutely. So I had a friend who was on the board of Ensemble Theater, and she realized that they had a board spot open and asked me if I was interested, and I automatically said yes because I think theater and film are so closely related, especially in Cincinnati. You're pulling actors that really live in both worlds a lot of the times. They
Mm-hmm.
sometimes act on stage and they act for the screen, and so there's a lot of overlap. In part of my MFA program, I studied playwriting. And I realized that I kind of fell in love with contemporary plays, which is a lot of what Ensemble does. It's all very, culturally relevant, kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. And that's why I love Ensemble so much. And so to be part of that and to learn, this is what it takes to kind of produce a playhouse, an organization like this, whether that's fundraising, marketing, development, DEIB, DEIA, all of that stuff. I became really passionate about it because it's a theater that pays cast and crew equitably, and it
Mm.
allows people, especially in Cincinnati, but from everywhere, to work and get paid a decent wage, which is really important to me, especially in our field, because sometimes that's really hard to come by. And so to learn from that and be part of that community and also help make that happen for people is really important.
And what about
So
the Women in Film organization?
yeah. So it was funny because I didn't teach at Xavier at this time. I was guest speaking in a class. They had a panel of judges to like judge some final film projects. And somebody that was there said, "Hey, there's an open board position on women in film. I'm on women in film. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Absolutely," because, we work in a male dominated industry. I'm a woman and there's challenges that comes with that. And there's also really good things that come with that. But I wanted to learn how to be more a part of that. And once I went to one of the first women in film board meetings, I realized there were so many powerful women locally in Cincinnati that I didn't know about that were doing all these amazing films. And I thought, what a great way to connect with women in our industry, but also as an organization, put forth networking events, programming, educational events that are really going to help foster the film community in our area.
Nice, nice. Well, talking about your experiences, you mentioned challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated industry, which but statistically it more so is not. But have you had any personal experiences with the downsides of being in that disparage?
Um, Luckily, no. I mean, just I think I have experienced the same things that a lot of people experience in male-dominated industries anywhere, whether it's media or not. I haven't had a catastrophic event, thankfully. I think sometimes it's hard to make your opinion and voice known in a room. Sometimes if you're the only woman, sometimes it's easy to kind of be pushed back into the corner, and I think it's a very subconscious thing sometimes. And so I think it's just about being vocal and making yourself present. And sometimes it kind of gets to you, right? You kind of start thinking like, oh, maybe I shouldn't speak up, maybe I shouldn't say this thing, maybe my opinion or my thoughts aren't valued, but really overcoming that. And I think that's a mental challenge that kind of comes with it that you can overcome.
Hmm. Okay. Um, well, when it comes to producing, I personally haven't had that much. I mean, I've had to produce, obviously when I've had to do something in order for a project. But it'd be nice to hear about your particular challenges because you've had a lot more iterations when it comes to productions. I think you have what 10 or 11 shorts listed on IMDb, and so you've
Yeah, that
had a
sounds
little
about
bit
right.
more reps in the chamber when it comes to logistics and organizing things. What was the first big challenge that you or problem that you had to solve in order for a production to go smoothly?
Yes. Well, I think the overall thing that I feel like I'm constantly trying to solve is like herding cats with all the moving parts, right? I feel like the biggest challenge that I started facing and that I still face is let me keep following up with people. Let me make sure that, this location said it's going to work. And now are they backing out? This actor said they're available and now I haven't heard from them in a while and I can't get a hold of them. And I feel like it's constantly corralling all of these people and all of these things and all of these moving parts. And I think that's something that really, really persists. Um, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Of course, there's been things like, okay, we have an outdoor shoot and we have to shoot it this day and it's raining. What do we do? How do we pivot? Do we rewrite something really quick? Can we push it? Do we go out in the rain? Stuff like that definitely always pops up. Your actor is sick last minute. That what do you do? Can you
Mm.
can you shoot a different day? Can you are you rewriting the script again? Is the whole thing over? There's a lot that goes into it. So I feel like there's always different challenges like that, but sometimes you get things that you just don't think you're going to get and there's no way to prepare for it.
Like what?
Oh, what a good question. Well, for example, people being in car accidents on the way to a project. What do you
There's a
do,
story
right?
there.
There's a story there, and thankfully people were okay in the situation, but it messed with the production, right? So there's that. There's props and costumes not arriving on time, especially if you're on a tight deadline. Um, I've had instances where I'm trying to get a finance department to pay out a vendor who maybe is our location or is specific equipment that we need, and there's something in the finance department that went awry and now we can't pay the people that we need and they're here ready but they're not going to do it because we can't pay them, and what do we
Little
do?
awkward.
A little awkward, yeah. And so then you have to have those hard conversations. I think there's stuff like that, and there's smaller stuff. If you're shooting outside and there's a guy two houses down running his lawnmower really loud, right, and you have to
Yeah, can't do much about that.
can't do much. I think, well, what I did is I said, this guy's either going to be really cool or this guy's going to be kind of a jerk. But
Mm.
I went down and I didn't know which one it was going to be. And I asked him to stop using his lawnmower for a couple hours. And he was actually really cool about it. But sometimes you get people who are grumpy.
Oh, well,
So,
that's nice.
yeah. So sometimes, you just never know what you're going to get. And you might have to have an unpleasant conversation with, you know,
I would have
anyone.
actually liked to have been there to see the interaction with the lawnmower guy, because if someone is mowing their lawn, they're either a really productive person or they're avoiding doing something that they would rather not be doing, and so they're just
Yes.
basically being productive while procrastinating, and
Yeah.
that might be a very grumpy person to actually go and talk to. But it sounds like you lucked out.
I did luck out, but it could have gone poorly. So I was very lucky in that situation.
What was the first? Well, you as a producer, you got to deal with a number of different departments. What
Yeah.
is uh, what is a skill set that you had to learn how to do that you didn't know how to do beforehand when it came to congealing everyone together on and getting them on the same page?
Yes. Um, I think it was reading the room and realizing that everyone communicates differently and everyone, depending on how they're wired, receives information differently.
Mm.
So some people you can text, hey, be here and do this at this time, and they're going to do it no problem. And some people you got to call on the phone and actually talk to them, or else they're not going to do it, right? And some
Gotcha.
people, you know, respond to emails or respond to text, like just basic communication things, and people have their own way of doing it, and it's kind of discerning that, but also discerning what language that person likes to hear things in. Like, do they want things straightforward, or do they want me to say like, hello, good morning, how are you, can you please do this, or do they just want me to say, hey, be there at this time? And it's really getting to know your crew and kind of reading the room. And I think that's a skill that I really had to learn. And then also, I feel like I have to write in my own like Google Calendar of like, here's a list of people that I'm going to contact every day and how I'm going to contact them by what method, or else I'll personally forget. So Harvard Business Review does a productivity study called blocking your calendar, block calendar. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Mm.
Um, but I primarily use Google Calendar. That's just what I like. But I put all of that kind of stuff in there. So whether it's a meeting or a task, and I really just have to block it out. So that was a skill I really had to adopt, or else I feel like all of my moving parts would have moved away from me.
Nice. Which board, I'm curious because you're a part of so many, requires the most amount of time out of your schedule? And, why do you, given the amount of time, it being the most amount of time that you have to put into it, compared to the others, um, do you find it worth, because there's a dichotomy obviously when it comes to, like, here I have all these things that I could be doing, with these other organizations, but then there's also time that I could be using to put more toward producing. How do you
Mhm.
find balancing that dichotomy, and why do you choose to go one way as opposed to choosing to go the other?
That is a great question. I believe that a lot of the board work I do directly influences my producing, and I take a lot of skills that I learn in my board work and apply it to producing. One of
Mm,
those is leading meetings, one is PR, one is fundraising, one is um, just general communication, one is building community partners, and all of that kind of goes into into producing. So I would say kind of where it all started for me and where I spend the most time. And sometimes I'm required to spend the most time doing this, and sometimes I just choose to spend extra time doing it.
mm,
Is the Junior League of Cincinnati. I don't know if you're familiar with that,
I'm
but
not.
we are a women's organization and we focus on volunteerism and professional development. And we're really a training organization. And it's kind of what got me started in all of this. And the Junior League is amazing in Cincinnati. There's chapters all over the nation, but the Junior League has a hand in over half of the nonprofits in Cincinnati historically. Um, and I believe that when a bunch of women get together and they're on a mission, it really just makes the world shake. It's a really powerful group of women, multi-generational. So I'm on the board as the director of strategic planning. So my job is to oversee vision strategy for success for the next few years and make sure everyone is working in line with that. And that's really what it's like for producing as well. And so I take those skills that I learned there and I apply them to producing, because I don't learn that on film sets. I have to learn it somewhere else and bring it to my film set.
Interesting.
Hmm.
What is a script, or not? What's a script? Um, Actually, I'll save that question for after this one. I'm figuring out how to, like, time my questions, because some are better when you ask in light of, and then some are better when you ask in,
Yeah, yeah.
in the beginning of. Um, what makes a project worth your time?
A few things. So I think the script is one of them. Do I feel like the script is compelling? Do I feel like it's interesting? Do I feel like it's well written? If I feel like it's cookie cutter, if it's been done a million times, if it's, cliche, I'm not here for it. But if I feel like it has a message or a theme that I'm passionate about, that's awesome. Or even if it's like a commercial piece or a corporate piece, but it's for a product or a business I really care about, it's
Hmm.
all that personal connection for me. So I think that's what makes it worth it. But even more so, it's the people that I do it with. So it's the crew. Um, I really value people who are determined, who are really good at their craft, who are dedicated, who are highly communicative, because I know that those are the things that make a project successful.
Hmm.
And really, overall, it's how you treat the people that you work with, right? Do people enjoy working with you? Are you pleasant? Are you pushing the project to be the best that it can be? Do you know what you're doing? And so for me, it's about the people involved in the crew.
Okay. What was the last script that you said no to, and why?
Oh, good question. Um, there was a script that I said no to, and I won't go super into what that script was,
Hmm.
but I felt like the payoff wasn't good in the script. I felt like the characters were not relatable, right? I didn't have that emotional tug. I felt like I looked at both of these characters and I was like, I don't really like them. Um, they're not for me, and so I had to say no to it.
Okay. So it was more the climax and the resolution that the script offered for its problems that you took issue with.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Is that a more common conclusion that you come to when it comes to dealing with the script? or is it just is the climax normally and the payoff the thing that you see as the most common problem of why you would say no?
It's a good question. Um, I think that's about 50% of the time. I think the other 50% of the time is, are these characters well developed enough, and do I believe in them, and am I sold on who they are as people, and do I relate to that? Do I think
Okay.
other people can relate to that?
You sent me two, and I watched both of them. Sent me two of your projects. One was 0% with Brandy Bock, in which I've had brief interaction with in the past.
Lovely. Yeah.
She's a great actress. I'd love to get her on,
Yeah.
and figure out how she ticks, and then grill her.
Yeah.
And then the other one was Stoned,
Hmm.
which was about some stoners who it had a very comedic element to it,
Crack me up. Yeah.
and obviously some clear Breaking Bad nods, which were entertaining,
Yeah.
but they were very very different in terms of their purpose, I suppose. The 0% was about a woman who it seems like it's kind of set in apocalyptic world, and we don't get too much of a look at it. But she's been kidnapped by essentially a pastor who's
Mhm.
attempting to brainwash her and
Yeah.
use her for sexual pleasure and those sorts of things. And then Stoned is I've never seen so much chaos revolve around marijuana. Normally it's really chill, which
Yeah.
was the ironic thing.
Yes.
Um, so you clearly have a very broad spectrum of interests when it comes to what you would like to produce.
Hmm.
When you have such a contrast between those projects, obviously there's going to be different reasoning as to why you choose. One, was funny, and then the other was much more serious. What about the serious element made you decide this? I think has potential.
Yes. So first off, I want to say both of these are written and directed by my dear friend Joe Cox. I don't know if you know him or not. He's amazing. And so um, to me, everything he writes is just fabulous. And he writes very different things, obviously. These are two very different projects. Um, and so for the more serious one, I think it can be relatable. I think not everyone, I think a lot of people have weird relationships with religion. Whatever that is, whether it was bad and is good now or vice versa, and um, things can get hairy in religion, things can get weird, right? And so I think that's what kind of drew me in, especially as a Midwestern filmmaker and something that takes place in the Midwest is that can be really taxing on people. That's just kind of the culture here, and so that's something I wanted to really explore, even though it was heavy. I think it affects a lot of people, and a lot of people in our 20s and 30s, especially. So that's what drew me into that.
If someone were to ask you for a project that you've done that is a best example of your producing work, which one would it be?
Oh, it's a very good question. Wow. You really got me on that one.
It's my job.
I know, yeah. I don't know if I even have one. I just feel like I'm thinking and everything is so different, right? Like, um, I think there have been times when I've traveled, which have been really hard because you're going to a place that you don't know. There's a film that I did with some friends in Pittsburgh. Um, and my friend from grad school did it. I met a lot of people in grad school, and I produced it, and it was so hard because I knew people from Pittsburgh from the university I went to, but I wasn't as familiar with the city, and it wasn't Cincinnati my home, and so it really made me realize, like, wow, um, there are so many connections that I have here that I take for granted, and that's what makes it really easy for me to produce here. And if I don't have that in another city, it's a whole other challenge. And it was really humbling, right? Because I had to go
Mhm.
reach out and do a lot of research, and I just felt like it wasn't as easy as it was for me before. And so that was kind of a challenging project. But I think it showcases my producing well because it shows my ability to overcome challenges.
Okay. Being that you're connected to, a number of different boards, and you're
Yeah.
a little bit more, probably much more so than I am, being the hermit writer that, I tend to be. Um, this podcast is vastly the majority of my socialization when it comes to filmmakers if I'm not on
Okay.
set, because well, I've been up in Dayton, working on or collaborating with a few different creators. One of them, I was supervising some visual effects for this proof of concept that this director is working on. It's like a cyberpunk film, with has
Yeah.
some action fighting and a little bit of mythology to it.
Cool.
Yeah, and I had my background in visual effects comes from a project that is taken the life and soul out of me, which I refuse to give up on. But it has a lot of visual effects in it, and um, that for me personally, that once that's finished will be my essentially calling card. But because it had so many different challenges when it came to the logistics of CGI, I definitely didn't want this director falling into the same pitfalls and traps that I did. So I'm like, no, you need to shoot it this way, otherwise you're going to be fucked. Don't do
Yeah.
it. Um,
Yeah.
what when it comes to working with the different departments, have you had any moments of interpersonal or logistical drama with a head of department, and how did you come to resolve that?
Yeah. Um, I think to an extent that can happen when people's expectations are not clear. So I feel like sometimes I work with a range of filmmakers at very different parts in their career with different values and who work on very different types of sets, right? Some
Mm-hmm.
people are used to working on these huge sets with, so many different crew members and it runs very smoothly a certain way. And some people are more in that like guerrilla filmmaking mode, small crew, skeleton crew vibes. And then there's everywhere in between. Um, and neither one is necessarily better than the other, but they're very different and they each have their pros and cons. And so sometimes when I work with newer filmmakers, and sometimes these are students that have just graduated college, um, their expectations are not the same as mine because they haven't worked before. This is their first time. This is their first rodeo working. And so sometimes I think they think I'm like being a little bit too harsh, get to the point, like go, go, go. And I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes that stresses them out. And then I feel like I'm like, okay, I have to come back and have this conversation. And really what it comes down to is relationship of like, okay, let's go get coffee, let's go get a beer, and let's talk about this, make sure we're all on the same page, see where I'm coming from, see why I'm pushing, and why you feel differently, and let's meet somewhere in the middle. And I think sometimes that happens with my newer filmmakers, my college grads, and it's kind of tough at first. I know I tend to go. I go go go, and so
Yeah.
I think that's sometimes where people are like, ah. But usually we get a cup of coffee or we get a beer, and like we get it, and then that thing works out well. But I think that's kind of what it comes down to. So yeah, the big resolution there is I think just relationship and getting to know each other, whether that's talking about film or talking about work or just talking about
Mm-hmm.
Bengals game or I don't know where you went on vacation last week. So yeah.
So, if you were to separate it into proportions, how much of your job when it comes to producing is dealing with logistics and then dealing with the people that are involved in those logistics? How much are you personally handling and how much are you delegating?
Good question. That is different on every single project. On larger projects, I love to pull an assistant producer on, and I have a few people that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to call them. They're going to be great assistant producers, and I'll delegate to them because I believe that if you have people to delegate to, you absolutely should, because then you have this oversight of the whole thing. Where if you're head down in a task, you don't have that oversight. You're not seeing the big picture, right? So
Mm-hmm.
to be able to do that is really important. So, there are some times when it's just me. I'm the producer. I have to do all the relational stuff and I have to do the logistics. And that's just the name of the game. And sometimes depending on the scope of the project and the people on the project, sometimes it's more leaning into relationships and sometimes it's more leaning into logistics and sometimes it's 50-50. But if I can, I will delegate and I'll really, really try to lean into relationships. I think that's the number one thing. That's the ideal situation.
What makes a interpersonal dynamic between people on set strong, and how do you emphasize that?
Yeah. I think I think a few things. I think vulnerability, and usually that happens in the pre-production process because usually there's some
Hmm.
traumatic event of like, oh my gosh, this fell through, or we made this mistake, or like, what, I don't know what we're gonna do. Usually that happens. And so I think that vulnerability really kind of breaks down some barriers and creates an interpersonal relationship that's really strong. But I also think it's just talking to people and getting to know people and talking about your journey as a filmmaker. Nobody sane does this, I think, because like, why would you? Because it's so much work and
Yeah.
there's so much risk and there's not a lot of money usually. Like, you really have to love it. And usually you've gone through some trial or obstacle to get to where you are, right? So, bonding over that and talking about struggles, I think really connects people as well. But another thing that I like to do too on my set sometimes is I'll just text people the night before our first day of shooting, like, what's your favorite candy? And I'll go out and I'll get it for some of the crew and cast because, or,
I'm getting
what's your
mom vibes. I'm not gonna lie. Some a little bit
but
some
what
some
was it?
soccer mom vibes. Like I'm gonna bring the
Soccer mom.
snacks. I'm
And
gonna bring
that's
the
what I
juice.
say
I'm
all
gonna
the
bring
time.
everything.
I'm a soccer mom. I really am. And I think I embarrass my friends because I'm like, oh, let me take your picture.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that was the soccer mom vibes. People want to feel taken care of. Um, but at the same time, you got to work your ass off. So like, where's that balance?
Hmm. When, because you the number of shorts that you've done, and you've done it over the last several years, getting involved in producing. I'm sure that you've encountered some red flags that you've had to learn from in terms of working relationships and as well as creative direction. So tell me
Yep.
about a little bit about some of the lessons that you've learned in terms of things that you figured out that you had to avoid or that
Mhm.
you could not necessarily overcome even with clear communication.
Absolutely. I think self-awareness is the number one thing. That's what I always say. Self-awareness is key. For example, I'm never really going to question a DP on their technical skills because I know nothing about that. And so, I'm going to hire someone who I think is a great DP and I'm going to let them run with it and, I'm going to trust them to do their thing and usually that works out. But sometimes we'll get people who think they know something about everything and no one knows something about everything. I don't, nobody does. And so really, I think humility and self-awareness of this is the lane that I'm really good at and that's what I'm going to stick to, and I'm going to lean on someone else's expertise for the lane that they're good at. I'm not telling the audio person how to be an audio person. I'm not telling the DP how to DP. I'm not telling the editor how to edit, and hopefully the DP is not telling me how to produce.
So you want to
Like,
avoid micromanaging.
exactly. And nobody wants to be micromanaged either. Like, I want to hire all the people on my set because I know they're really good at that one thing that I hired them to do, and just let them run with it and trust that they're going to do an amazing job. So I think that's a really big thing. And then I think people that can't communicate timely, right? That can't be motivated. I always say I can't motivate someone. I can teach you a hard skill. I can kind of, correct you, but I can't, fire that inspiration and motivation necessarily. I can send you some motivational quotes, right? But I can't like
Yeah.
I can't like,
You
you
don't
know,
enjoy pushing wet rope, when it
right,
comes to
exactly. I
people.
can't
Yeah.
like put a passionate flame of fire for film production in anybody. So if you don't have that, then and it's not driving you to do the thing, then maybe it won't work out.
Hmm. When you're going to hire somebody, though, do you take a? Obviously, I would assume that when you're going to hire that you take a look at their reel and things like that. But when it comes to, I'm going to pose this question as somebody who is wanting to see what a producer looks for. When you're going to hire somebody, what what is a good indication when you're looking at their work that this person is going to provide value for the production?
So that's a great question. I will say typically when I hire, I don't even necessarily look at work. I sometimes do, but usually it is somebody that I've worked with before or that I get a reference from somebody that I worked with
Mm-hmm.
before. So like if I have a really close friend who's a director or DP or whatever, and I'm like, hey, I need an audio person. And they say, oh, hire this person. I've worked with them a million times. I'm going to work with them. Or you should work with them. Great. I'll probably do that because I trust that person. And that's how relational I think that our industry is. Of course, like with a DP, I want to see their reel. Of course, the director, I want to see their reel. but usually it's more based on what the people that I trust are saying about them.
Okay. I actually meant to ask this question slightly earlier, but better late than never, you know?
Yeah.
Um, in order for Cincinnati, because, you know, you seem fairly decently plugged into the scene, is there any challenges that you see holding the local filmmaking scene, holding it back from growing and then becoming a little bit more predominant? Because now we have the potentially Sundance that's looking at Cincinnati to come, which would, you know, would be a great boost for
Yeah, I would love it.
everything. It would be, we would all be giddy, giddy past
Mhm.
our gills. Um,
Yeah.
what are the challenges or things that you think that need to be improved for the local scene to grow bigger into a much more flourishing and, like, what is the word, monetarily incentivized
Yeah.
place to be?
I think connection is the biggest thing. I think we see a lot of different pockets of filmmakers, like media producers, people that work in the industry in general. We see all these pockets, right? And
Yeah, there's a lot
they're
of
not
pockets.
collaborating,
Yeah.
right? It's like I hear this person at the table all the time. I never worked with them, or like these. Oh, I know these people always work together, and these people always work together, and that's great, right? You have this group of people that you love to work with. That's awesome. But when you're not collaborating, you're not getting new ideas, and that's you're not getting stronger. You're just doing the same thing over and over again, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you need to. So I wish these different pockets of filmmakers would just come together and do stuff with people that they've never worked with before. But we're all in the same city, and we all bring all of these strengths. And so I think that networking, that collaboration, and I get it. I think it's hard for a lot of people to like go jump into a bar at a networking event for media and be like, hey, you're a DP, let's go work on something. I don't know. Sometimes that's hard. I get it. But I think if we could overcome that, and then especially with different organizations like Women in Film, different media production houses, Film Cincinnati, and like let's all come together. And I think a lot of these organizations are doing a really good job at that, and they're starting to really amp that up. But I think it's the individual, just pockets of people who work in town. I wish they would just collaborate more. I think that would really start to, you know,
Sounds like you need to start another board. Not gonna lie, I
I
think maybe
know
we just need one more board,
one more.
one more grand secret society of filmmakers that just, you know, like just, you know, conspires behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah.
Producing is obviously very difficult. What is a challenge that you think most people don't know about that you would like to shed a little bit more light on?
Good question. I don't think you really get like time off. And I know that happens in other departments too. So I'm not saying that it doesn't. But I think, if you're communicating with a hair salon that you want to be your location and they
Mm-hmm.
text you back at 11 p.m. and then text them back at 11:05 p.m., like to keep that conversation going. So I think there's that, or like when you get a call from talent the night before a shoot and it's 3 in the morning of, they're sick or they had some emergency where they can't be on set the next day. And then you need to work through that at 3 in the morning and figure that out so that your day on set tomorrow is successful. And so I think that's definitely one of the challenges. I think another challenge is, yeah, just following up with people. I think I always just say half of my day is following up. And I don't think people realize that.
What's your dream project that you'd love to be able to produce?
Okay, so I would love to do some documentaries. I've done a few documentary type things before, but I'd love to do like a real solid documentary. Um, and I think I would love to do a travel documentary on food. I'm a big foodie, and I think
Hmm.
that's just something I'm really passionate about, and the story of food and what that means to different cultures and different people and different generations and how that impacts people. So I think that would be my dream project.
Why is it your dream project? It's generally when people say dream project, it's normally something very grand and very,
Mhm.
you know, just anything that requires a lot of money. That's everybody's
Yeah.
dream project.
Yeah. Yes.
Why documentaries?
Um, I think as I've grown older, I'm not that old, but as I've grown older, I
Back in
feel
my
like
day, I think I liked documentaries.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like I love telling real people story. Not to say that narrative isn't real people. It is kind of. I mean, it's the it's the projection of a real person, right? But
Right.
like, I love telling real people stories, and I think specifically for this one, we all eat. Um, and
That
what does
that
that
is
mean?
that is true. We do all
We all
eat.
we all eat, and I love to eat, and I'm a big traveler. I love world travel, and to understand that the concept and the idea and the emotions around food in America is very different than in Europe, than in Africa, than in Asia, and all these different places. Um, and what does that mean? Because I think it's really an art form, and it's a way of communication, and it's a way of storytelling.
Mm.
And so to me, it's just like storytelling upon storytelling. And humans, I don't know, we're just made
You
to
think
tell
it's kind of
stories.
meta in that way?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
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 Well, maybe you should just film a mockumentary and get the best of both worlds.
Okay.
You get a little bit of fiction, and then you get a little bit of
Yeah.
a documentary thing, and then scratch both edges.
Let's do it.
Honestly, I think there really needs to be a movie about the production of a movie. I feel like that would be a
Yes.
good movie. Yeah.
I've been thinking that too. Yeah, I've definitely had that thought. I mean, I would watch it.
Well,
Big
okay, in this hypothetical movie, who would we get to play the director as like the typical stereotype of a director?
Stanley Tucci.
Stanley Tucci. I don't even know that person. I need to go
Stanley
look this.
Tucci. He oh my gosh. I mean, he's in a lot of stuff. He's in one of my favorites is The Lovely Bones.
The Lovely Bones, another film that I need to look up.
Yes, but
What's that film about?
what is that one about?
Yeah, what genre is it?
It's kind of like a thriller suspense. It came out in 2009. Here, pulling it up.
Okay.
After being brutally murdered, 14-year-old Susie Salmon watches from heaven over her grief-stricken family and her killer, which is Stanley Tucci, and she observes their daily lives. So it's a
Okay, so
thriller.
he was the killer
He
in
was
in
he
that.
was the bad guy. Yeah.
So he can play like the narcissistic, like
Yeah, like I picture him
egotistical
with
sort
like
of
a
person.
beret and like I don't know, like a cup of coffee and a cigarette, like very, I don't know.
Hmm. When it comes to talk a little bit about the money aspect, when you're delegating money management within a production, what generally have you found needs more allocation that you people would find surprising?
Um, gear, gear rental, camera gear rental. I think people find that surprising. People always ask, why do you need this much money for that? And then you break it down after you get,
Yeah.
your estimates back, and they're like, oh, okay. But I think that's a big thing. And I think paying contractors, because people don't realize that independent contractors have to take out money for taxes.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
and so they're very shocked by that, and so I think that's what really gets them is paying independent contractors and then renting camera gear.
For other producers who are getting into this line of work, what are some helpful tools that from your experience that you could share?
Yeah. So like if you want to be a producer, or if you want to be at any role on a film set, wherever city you want to work in, I would go find like who are the big DPs, who are the big producers, who are the big directors, whatever, who are the big audio people, editors, and go meet with them, go have a Zoom coffee or an in-person coffee, right? And go
Hmm.
just pick their brains and connect with them, see if you can work for free on their projects, right? It's all about the people connection, but just start being a sponge of knowledge, especially for people that work in that specific role that you are looking to work in.
What's your most what is the most fulfilling aspect of being a producer that makes you keep wanting to come back and do it again?
I think it is being able to work with creative people and I can help make their vision come true in a way that they might not have capacity to.
Hmm.
So, if I'm working with a writer, a director, a DP who has this creative vision, this is what they want. They want this location and this actor, but they don't know how to get these things. Or, they need this amount of money or whatever, and making that happen for them so that their creative dreams and visions can come true. That's really, really satisfying for me.
What was the first emotional film that filled you up emotionally when you walked away from the theater that inspired you to start taking on this line of work?
Manchester by the Sea.
Manchester. That's the one with Casey Affleck, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like it was like really heavy, right? Because like he like
Yeah.
accidentally like kills his whole family. Um, yeah. No, I think I just really felt that, and I think it was the pacing of that, and that was kind of I saw it at, if you're a Cincinnati person, Esquire Theater. And I think that film was paced in a way that let me really like sit and breathe in the sadness, and I kind of wanted to feel that sadness because I was just enamored with the heaviness of it and what that meant, and how this guy made this horrible mistake, but I still really liked him, and that was a very interesting emotion to feel. And I was like, wow, I want to make people feel like that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the film, but I have seen some clips from it. Honestly, this is a bit of a side tangent. I think honestly, seeing movie clips on the internet when it comes to like people just uploading on reels or shorts,
Hmm.
it really does, I think, the industry at large a disservice because you're getting highlights of it where it scratches enough of an itch where it might deplete your desire a little bit to actually go sit down and watch the full thing just out of
Yeah.
curiosity. Because reels and shorts, they're fulfilling that sense of curiosity, and you're getting the dopamine hit without the putting in of the work of sitting
I
down
would
and
agree
going
with
through the
that.
entire story.
Yes. Yeah,
So when obviously I post shorts, but this is a podcast,
sure.
when it comes to art, when you're deciding to start publishing it, start advertising your project, going to festivals, etc. What are some decent marketing strategies, or how do you like to portray your project in the light of its story in order to attract eyeballs?
That's a good question. I mean, it depends on the story, right? I think there needs to be a different marketing strategy and social media strategy for each project, depending on who your audience is. If your audience is, people that are into A24 films, that's like, people love that right now. I think it's how, to me, it's like I'm sitting here doing a lot of research on how is A24 marketing and how do I model that? How are these films that I find similar marketing? What are their social media cadences? What are they doing? Now, if I'm going to like a film festival with the film, it's how can I make my film really easily like shareable for the festival? Am I giving them, their electronic press kit? Am I giving them compelling graphics in the right with the right specs, which on a more technical end, that's what you need to do. But when I get to the festival and I'm socializing and I'm networking, how am I standing out amongst everyone else? Am I handing out little keychains that have a character from my film on it? Or like I don't
Yeah.
know, it could be anything, right? Like so yeah, I think it depends on the film, but really it's how do you differentiate yourself? Because at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of films just very similar to yours, and how do you make yours stand out?
How do you think producing has changed you or shaped your personality in the way that, into the person that you've become? Because it's a very people oriented job, but obviously I would imagine that there's a number of introverted things that goes on, when it comes to producing a film that most people wouldn't think about. So tell me about the dichotomy of both that personality dynamic and how it's changed for you over time.
Yeah, I feel like I've had to get really good at self-soothing because I feel like as a producer, I'm usually like someone else's therapist, which is great. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, but like, and I enjoy doing that, but also I
Like I
feel like
have
there's a lot of
problems too.
I have them too. I need help.
Yeah.
But yeah, just like creating a strong mindset of like, okay, there's this problem, here's this thing, and it could fail and everything could go up in flames. If it does, how am I going to cope with that? And usually I can talk myself into being okay with that, of like this could all just be awful, but at the end I'm going to be okay. And I don't think I was always like that, but I've developed that skill just to like say that, and then also say, okay, I have these problems I don't think I can overcome, but actually I can overcome them. And I'm not going to go into the details, but that happened to me last week, and I was like laying in bed all night awake, like freaking out about a project, and then I woke up very tired the next morning because I barely slept. And then by 6 p.m. that day, I had solved all my problems. So I was like, okay, I laid in bed all
Magic.
night. Yeah, like freaking out about my problems. And then by 6 p.m. the next day, they were all solved. So, like, this is proof it's all going to be okay.
What are some introverted tendencies that you've seen grown in the producing realm that you found surprising? Because obviously, it's very extroverted.
Yeah.
you're doing a lot of people, but in terms of, self introspection, the producer is also a person, believe it or not. You
Yes.
seem
Yeah.
like a person to me. They're not
Thank
just
you.
they're not just there to make everyone else happy. They have their own thing going on.
Yeah.
What do you think you could communicate to other people who are in different lines of work, or that will fill the roles of the different departments, that would be helpful for them to know when it comes to both approaching their producer for to either be hired or to show work. Say, I'll use myself an example. Say a screenwriter wants to go to a producer.
Yeah.
Hey, I got this project. A lot of and some of the writers that I've talked to, they're like, I mean, I feel like we have this perception of producers. It's like, well, they're probably always getting bombarded with requests and things like that, and our stuff's just going to get thrown to the wayside, or maybe just barely skimmed over and not appreciated, that sort of thing. Tell me about what it's like from your end on receiving those requests to either have work reviewed or work proposals, and how you go about sorting through that, those types of messages
Yeah.
and requests.
Yeah. So I think it's very similar to my hiring process. So if it's somebody that I routinely work with that I love, or if it's a recommendation from someone that I routinely work with that I love and I trust, then yes, I think I'm 100% going to give it everything and really look at that and really consider that project. Um, if it's somebody that I don't know as well and I can't get a good reference on, usually I say no, because um there's only so many hours in my day and I'm only one person. And I think I used to feel bad
Mm-hmm.
about saying no, but sometimes the email back is, hey, I'm really sorry I don't have capacity right now. Check again in a year, check again in, however long. But and I used to kind of feel shitty doing that. But if I'm giving attention to everything, then I'm actually giving attention to nothing.
That's true. Because I mean, obviously you're a busy person. You're juggling, probably, I would assume, multiple projects at the same time. One's trying to get greenlit, and then the other is trying to get its feet off the ground so it can get greenlit. And so you're seemingly always in a balancing act, even when you're not in production,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of stressful. How do you decompress when you're juggling with so much as a producer?
Yes. There's a few things that I do. Um, I've really enjoyed driving in silence. Like you, which I know
That
sounds so
sounds like the
bad.
most depressing thing I have ever heard of. That's like what I do when I'm like, oh, like that's my solution. That's my last solution to writer's block, is driving
It's
around
just
in
driving in
silence.
silence. Well, because what happens for me is like, so if sometimes I get in the car and I just want to turn music on or a podcast. Well, like if I sit in silence, then I can like all the thoughts from the day can come to me, and then I start to
Mm.
sort everything out and solve my problems and come up with solutions. So like that feels like a decompressing, because it's like, okay, I actually have time to think about what happened today and I'm not distracted by music or anything. So that's a big thing. I'm like a big, and sometimes I'm embarrassed to say it, but I'm going to say it. I'm a big like cycling Pilates girl. So like
Hmm.
I will do a cycling or a Pilates class probably 6 days a week, because that's like get all that nervous energy, that anxious energy out. Um, and also I found that like in a class that's strenuous like that, it teaches you to push through physically what you don't think you can do, hold that weight a little bit longer, bike those extra 30 seconds, and then I translate that into producing of like, I don't think I'm going to solve this problem. Oh, actually, look, I was actually able to like those extra 30 seconds I could, and I was actually able to hold that weight longer than I could. Okay, I'm going to push through this problem. And so that kind of is another decompression for me. But it just relates at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, driving in silence can be its own form of meditation in a way.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
start playing those, like those frequency vibes when you just have a really stressful day, and then you're trying not to crash, but you're also trying to achieve nirvana in the same way. Just like something,
Yeah.
something, something,
It's like
something.
it's a weird state to be in. Yeah. Sometimes I'll go for a walk too. That's nice. But yeah.
Mhm. Based on your personal experience, obviously there's not producers. But which the amount of people who do produce, obviously, just produce by themselves, other than helping out here and there where they can. There's a lot of people that do that in one regard, at least at the indie level. at the indie level, you got to a lot of people have to wear multiple hats.
Yes.
But based on your experience, which field of or department of filmmaking do you think that there's just not enough people of, and that where's the deficit?
I think there's two. I think it's producers, but I also think it's audio.
Mm,
It's really hard for
yeah,
me. And like if you're a good audio person, you're always working, at least in Cincinnati, which is amazing because there's not enough of you.
right, yeah,
So I think it's audio, and I also think it's producers and then ADs as well. Because the AD kind of has to have the same characteristics as a producer in terms of the logistics and the organization. So I think people don't like to do that, which I understand. Um, so I think those would be the two fields.
okay. Well, I've I mean, my funny enough, my although he doesn't do it anymore, my brother was an audio guy.
Oh yeah.
And then I remember he wasn't sure if when we were filming a particular production of mine, which is still being worked on, it's the one with all the CGI. When I think, if I recall correctly, there was a point where he wasn't sure if he was going to be able to do it or have the time for it, and so at least as a backup plan, we were trying to see if we can grab an audio guy just in case, see if there's someone that's open whose schedule was open.
Sure.
And there wasn't. There was
Yep.
nobody.
It's so
Being
hard.
audio people, they're very silent.
Yes.
Ironically,
Yeah, and that's the thing is like you can't have a kind of good audio guy. You have to have a really good audio
you're either
guy.
good or you're not good. Like it's one of those
Exactly.
things. Is like it's
Yes.
very clear whether or not you know what you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah. So you
With
have to have a good one.
cinematography. Yeah, with cinematography, it's like I mean, you can kind of fake it for a little bit.
Yeah.
You
If you
you
have a
pull
good
up.
camera department, you might be able to fake it. Yeah.
Yeah, you pull up with an expensive rental and be like, all right, you can at least buy yourself like at
Yeah.
least 20 minutes
Yes.
of credibility before you have to actually show proof. You got a
This
little
is
bit of a
true.
step in the door.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about producing? And we can close with this. Not not just that what you wish people knew more about, but when so, talk to somebody who's thinking about becoming a producer as at least a primary field to fulfill, even if they have other interests like directing or writing or
Yeah.
or editing in that sort of regard. They're thinking about getting into producing. Why do you think producing is a surprisingly fulfilling role to be in, even though sometimes it's not always the most aesthetically creative?
Because I think you really get to create magic in the producing role. You get to overcome challenges that no one else feels like can be overcome. You get to make things happen that people thought there was no way to happen logistically, financially. You get to really creatively problem solve.
Hmm.
Um, and you get to have conversations with everybody. Your hand can be in every single department, which is really cool. I don't know if that happens as much in many directing it happens, but in other
Right.
roles, maybe not. So yeah.
Hmm. Well, when it comes to producing is also a very mysterious role, which is why I have so many questions, like specifically on producing,
Good.
because it takes so many different shapes as well.
Oh
What one
yeah.
producer is going to be doing on another production that you'll see, and then you'll witness, and then you'll go to another production and be like, okay, it's completely different now. None of these things are lining up, and there sometimes you'll have two different like co-producers, and then the tag teaming when it comes to that sort of thing. But because you've worked, when I looked at your IMDb,
Hmm.
your first three projects were from different directors,
Yeah.
and lately, you mentioned his name, Joseph Cox, who I haven't had interaction with, but the last several projects were consecutively working with him. What
Yeah.
about working with Joseph, the current director that you've been, a part of on multiple projects, that you makes you want to keep coming back and reworking with that same person? Because obviously you didn't in the beginning. You worked with several people, and
Yeah.
you fulfilled your role. The short and the production got greenlit and it got finished, but you saw a different. You wanted to experience something else. So what about consecutively working with another key creative role has kept you coming back?
Yeah. Um, I mean, I love Joe because he is focused on excellence and just doing something technically very, very well. And he's also a very collaborative person. He cares very much so about every single person involved. And so when you care about the people that you work with and they know that, they're going to perform better. And I think he does a really good job of that. And I also enjoy the diversity of his work. Like we were saying earlier, he can write some really different scripts and they're all amazing in their own very different ways. And so I'm so lucky to get to work with him, and I just hope I can continue to because of all of those things.
What's and we I said we close on the last one, but like I'm trying to hit the hour mark perfectly. You know, it's just something
Yeah,
so
yeah,
satisfying. It's just
it is.
it is. Um, what? Tell me about the project that you've got coming out. That isn't finished. It's in pre-production. I saw it listed on Indeed, but I was just curious about it. You know, go ahead and
Oh, are you talking
sell
about
yourself.
Squalor? Is that what you're
Yeah,
talking about?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's also with Joe Cox. Oh, I don't know how much he wants me to say about it, but yeah, it's a very
Spoil
Midwest
absolutely everything.
everything. I'll tell you everything. Yeah, it's a Midwestern film. It's with a similar crew but slightly different as our last projects. And it's about the Midwestern myth of the forest creature called the squalor
Mm,
and what happens with it.
Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Bigfoot. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly.
All right, Erica. Well, it was nice getting to know you. It
You
was a privilege to
too.
actually be able to hear from a producer, the first producer I've had on the podcast. I've
Oh,
actually got one more scheduled, I think, for tomorrow. But been getting into lately the logistics of production because it's not something that I've personally touched in any real way. So it was really interesting just to get to hear about your work, your methods, and how much you care about people, which is very, although it's indicative of more indie filmmaking, it is quickly lost once you exit filmmaking, indie filmmaking in that regard. And so it was nice to hear from you. Are there any last thoughts you want to leave with the audience?
no, thank you. Thank you so much for hearing about producing and having me on the podcast, especially because the producer role's a weird one. So I appreciate it.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to seeing your work when it comes out. Thanks for coming on the podcast. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was lovely.